My name is Mira Vale, and I am 28 years old, standing in the hushed lobby of a glass-walled law firm where the carpet swallows footsteps and even sorrow sounds expensive. Yesterday, we buried the man who saved my life, Adrian Cole, and today, I wait to hear how his last wishes will be carried out. When the elevator opens, two shadows from a past I've spent half my life outrunning step into the light. Victor and Celine Vale. My parents. 15 years of silence cling to them like smoke. Their smiles are too quick, their jewelry a little too loud, their eyes scanning for numbers no one has mentioned yet. The sight of them knocks the air from my lungs, and then like a camera jump cut the room dissolves. I am no longer in a building with marble walls. I am back in a cramped apartment that smelled of damp carpet and yesterday's grease, a place where the radiator rattled like a warning and sirens stitched our nights together. We lived on the 4th floor in a one-bedroom where the bedroom went to the adults and the pull-out couch in the living room went to me and my little brother Leo. Leo had a soft laugh and a wheeze that came on whenever the seasons changed. He saw animals in clouds and cities in water stains, filling dollar store notebooks with drawings he shaded with his thumb. I learned how to ration food the way other kids learn piano peanut butter sliced thin across bread, apples stretched into quarters, lunches engineered from club snacks and kindness. Victor, my father, worked when the weather cooperated and when he felt like answering his phone. Summers, he swung a hammer on roofing crews. Winters, he gambled baseball, basketball, horses, anything with a point spread. Payday meant fresh promises, sometimes ice cream, often liquor. He could be tender for 10 seconds and terrifying for the next 10 minutes, a lightning storm that didn't need clouds. Celine. My mother sold lipstick she couldn't afford to wear. Practicing smiles in compact mirrors, telling anyone who'd listen that she was supposed to be somewhere else in life, on a runway in a condo with white couches anywhere but here with 2 kids who scuffed their shoes. When I turned 8, she forgot my birthday, and I tried not to mind. That night, I found a bracelet on my pillow. Plastic beads the color of grapes, strung a little too tight. Leo had skipped lunches to buy it and drew me a card from construction paper he'd pulled from a classroom recycle bin. I cried into the pillow so he wouldn't hear. The tears weren't disappointment so much as something that felt bigger and cleaner. Gratitude sharp enough to sting. I met Adrian Cole when I was 10. He arrived in a black sedan that looked borrowed from a different neighborhood, maybe a different planet. He was my father's older brother, and he wore a suit that fit and a kindness that wasn't performative. He knew how to look a kid in the eye without bending them into a prop. He brought Leo a remote control car and handed me a book about women who changed the world with problems they solved, rather than dresses they wore. You remind me of someone, he said, our grandmother, sharp mind, stubborn heart. I didn't know then that a sentence could function like a key. I only knew something inside me unlocked. I also learned that day how resentment can build a wall between brothers taller than any skyline. Victor turned brittle around Adrian. Words got sharp edges. Pride flared. Offers of help. School tuition, a bigger apartment, an inhaler without a panic attack were refused with a shrug made of barbed wire. We don't need charity, my father said. We don't need a scoreboard, Adrian replied quietly. It was not a fight. It was a stalemate that lived in our kitchen. As I moved into my teens, scarcity grew teeth. Eviction notices curled on our door like dead leaves. The power cut off on Fridays when the utility office closed for the weekend. We collected condiment packets from fast food counters because the fridge held more air than food. Leo's asthma worsened. I became fluent in adults' faces, the tight smile of a landlord, the flinch of a teacher who notices a bruise that isn't a bruise, just thin skin and nerves. Then came the week that rewired the story of my life. An October Thursday sky, polished blue, and the air crisp enough to taste. We're taking a little trip, Celine announced, lipstick, perfect perfume, sweet enough to drown in. We never took trips. We took buses, and that day we took one for 3 hours, to a town I'd only ever notice on a map if my finger slipped. We walked to a tidy house with plastic covers on the furniture, and the blinds mostly closed. This is Mrs. Whitaker, Victor said, like the sentence had been rehearsed. An old friend. We'll stay a few days. It wasn't a few days. That first night they said they were running to the store for groceries. Leo perched by the window until the streetlight blinked on and the glass showed his face back to him. I told him they'd be back soon. I arranged blankets. I told lies and hoped they'd become true if I cared enough. In the morning, their phones sang the same robotic message the numbers were no longer in service. Mrs. Whitaker made toast we didn't eat and avoided eye contact like it was contagious. On day 2, Leo spiked a fever, his breathing worsening. A doctor came, left an inhaler, left us with words like hydrate and rest words that felt flimsy against the weight in my chest. In the kitchen, my voice surprised me with its volume. "Where are they? When are they coming back?" Mrs. Whitaker's shoulders slumped. She opened a drawer and took out an envelope with my mother's loops and flourishes on the front. Inside, a letter that said too little and too much. "We can't keep going like this. You deserve better. Don't try to find us." It framed abandonment as a gift and expected applause. By afternoon, the police came, then Child Protective Services. Adults with clipboards asked careful questions that felt like tiny knives. "Were you hurt?" "No." "Do you know where they went?" "No." "Do you have any relatives?" I said a name like a flare, Adrian Cole. "Chicago." The caseworker, Ms. Hart, promised they would try to find him. The next day, she told me Leo would be placed temporarily with a foster family in another county, while I stayed in a group home nearby. Temporarily is a word that can mean anything. That day, it meant separate. I remember the last image of my brother from that week with the clarity of glass, his forehead against a car window, his palm open his mouth, forming my name without sound. Then the car rounded the corner, and the street swallowed him whole. The group home kept schedules like life rafts. Chore charts and lights out. The bed sheets smelled of bleach and unfamiliar laundry soap. I stopped talking. I counted ceiling tiles. I carried the book Adrian had given me from room to room because keeping it in my hands felt like keeping a promise I couldn't name. 2 weeks later, Ms. Hart walked into the office where I sat tracing cracks in the vinyl floor with a shoe I was still growing into. "We found him," she said, and for a second I thought she meant Leo, which is how you can tell I was still a child. She meant Adrian. The next day he appeared in the doorway, looking like a version of himself taken apart and put back together, wrong tie askew eyes, red-rimmed, a man with money and without sleep. He knelt not to make me smaller, but to make his voice level with mine. "Mira," he said, and my name sounded different in his mouth, less like a roll call, more like a vow. "I am so sorry. I should have known." Paperwork began to breed petitions. Verifications, background checks, multiplied like rabbits. Adrian rented a small apartment near the group home to stay close while he worked through the maze. He visited daily. He asked me what I wanted for dinner, and then cooked it badly at first with the seriousness some people reserve for strategy meetings. When the court finally stamped an order granting temporary guardianship, the ink might as well have been oxygen. We flew to Chicago. Adrian's home wasn't a house so much as a constellation of rooms. The gate clicked shut behind us. The air smelled like clean cotton and something citrus. My room was bigger than our old apartment, an absurd canopy bed, a closet with clothes that fit a window that looked out onto a slice of skyline. "If you don't like any of it," Adrian said, awkward in the doorway, "we'll change it. All of it." I didn't like that the room was silent. I didn't like that there was only one pillow breathing in the dark. He hired a driver who told me terrible jokes, and a housekeeper who taught me how to knead dough, and a therapist named Dr. Lynn, whose office smelled of tea and new paper. "What your parents did is about them." Cheer, Lynn said softly, "It is not about your worth." I nodded, because nodding is what you learn to do when adults say gentle things you don't yet know how to believe. School shifted the ground under my feet again. Private hallways, sweaters with crests, classmates who spent spring break in places where the ocean colored the world. A girl asked why I lived with my uncle. Another asked if my parents were dead. I said they weren't. The conversation died instead. The nightmares arrived like weather, uninvited, inevitable. I woke heart-sieving adrenaline, certain Leo was gasping without his inhaler. Adrian would appear in my doorway, hair-mussed eyes alert, a man learning too late, but learning how to be needed at 3 a.m. After the 5th night, he and Dr. Lynn taught me how to anchor myself. Name 5 things I could see. 4. I could touch 3. I could hear. I said curtain bedpost breath and meant all of them. What I didn't expect was Adrian learning alongside me. He took a parenting class hosted at the community center downtown, sat in a metal chair with other adults who would have looked out of place in his boardroom. He asked my opinion before making decisions that affected me and listened as if my words had weight. I had never before seen an adult revise himself in public. On my 14th birthday, after a small, awkward celebration where two girls from school taught me how to blow out candles without spitting, Adrian handed me a small, wrapped box. Inside lay a silver locket, plain oval, smooth as worry. I opened it and gasped. On one side, a photo of Leo and me squinting into sunlight in a park I barely remembered. On the other, a space left empty. I asked around your old block, Adrian said, ashamed to have gone behind my back and proud he'd done it for me. Your 4th grade teacher, Ms. Alvarez, had a copy from a school day. The locket was light, but it weighted my chest in the best way an anchor disguised as ornament. We worked the system. That is how it felt like pushing a boulder up a hill greased with rules. Leo had been placed with a kind foster family in another state, and kindness didn't cancel bureaucracy. Adrian hired the best family lawyers money could respectfully buy, the ones who understood that showing up is a form of love and documentation is a form of language. He turned meetings into momentum. He installed a filtration system in what would be Leo's room because he read that cleaner air eases asthma. He framed one of Leo's old drawings, a city built from clouds, and hung it over the bed as if the room were only waiting for its owner to catch up to it. Months later, we were granted a supervised visit. I had rehearsed 100 versions of this reunion, and none of them involved me dropping a cup of cafeteria water because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Leo walked in thinner and taller eyes too big. He looked at me like he was measuring whether reality could be trusted this time. Mira, he said, as if the name might be a trick. I nodded, and then he ran arms around my waist, his breath warm through my shirt. You came, he said into fabric. I knew you would. When he pulled back, he had a smear of pencil across his cheek, an artist's birthmark. Adrian kept respectful distance, introduced himself to Leo as if asking permission to join a story already in progress. You can call me Adrian, he said gently, or something else later if you want. Leo ignored him for 3 minutes, which is how 10-year-olds negotiate trust. Then he asked about the house and whether there was a dog not yet, and if people in Chicago really ate pizza with a fork, apparently some do. We agreed not to judge them out loud. At the end of the hour, Leo gripped my hand with the strength of someone trying to hold back the tide. Don't leave me again, he whispered. Panic metal tasting at the edge of his words. I wanted to promise that nothing bad would ever happen again, but I had learned not to make promises the world could break, so I told the truth I could carry. Never by choice, I said. Never if there's any way to stop it. We are going to figure this out. Across the room, Adrian nodded like a witness, like a partner, like the adult I had wished into existence for years. He would push papers and pay fees and sit in waiting rooms and call judges' assistants by their first names until the path cleared. When we left the visitation center, the sky was gray-blue, the city's skyline a row of teeth biting into cloud. Adrian put the car in gear and said we keep going. It sounded like both a plan and a prayer. Back in the law firm lobby where this memory began, the elevator dings again. I am 28, not 13, and I can recognize the shape of a story now. It has beginnings and ruptures and pivots. It has people who leave, people who stay, and one man who decided that staying would be his calling. Part 1 of my life ends not with a door closing, but with a hand held tight in a room supervised by strangers and a promise spoken plain. We keep going. The promise I made in that supervised room. We keep going didn't dissolve when we stepped outside. It hardened into routine. Adrian Cole learned the taste of courthouse coffee and the names of clerks who could make a file move an inch faster. I learned how hope behaves under bureaucracy. It shows up on time, carries folders, and refuses to be embarrassed by waiting rooms. The first orders were temporary trial placements, scheduled check-ins, more acronyms than a dictionary would tolerate. Leo stayed with his foster family across state lines, while Adrian proved line, by notarized line, that he could raise 2 children who had already learned too much about scarcity. He moved projects off his calendar at Cole Shield Systems, the cybersecurity company he'd built, and moved parenting into the center of the page. He didn't know the language at first. He mispronounced individualized education plan and confused continuance with contempt. But he kept showing up, and a person who keeps showing up learns fast. Weeks turned to months. We drove to visitations, collected receipts, documented everything. Dr. Lin, my therapist, became a quiet metronome in the background, helping me replace panic with patterns. Adrian turned one guest room into Leo's room even before we had a date. He installed a hospital-grade air filter and left sketch pads on the desk, as if welcoming my brother in absentia might coax the universe into catching up. When the judge finally approved kinship placement for both of us, me formally, Leo conditionally pending the last interstate paperwork, the relief didn't burst. It seeped. There were still court dates ahead, but the path tilted downhill. A caseworker showed me where to sign. Adrian held his breath until the pen left the page, then exhaled like a man surfacing. Chicago grew less alien. I learned the bus routes that smelled like morning and the ones that smelled like last night. The private school uniform navy sweater crest stitched over the heart stopped feeling like a costume. I wasn't wealthier there. I was simply less hungry. The cafeteria didn't ration milk. The teachers had time. On my 14th birthday, after a small dinner where the conversation moved like a careful cyclist steady alert, Adrian placed a box in front of me. Inside lay the silver locket he'd given me in part 1, only now the empty side held a tiny photo Leo taken during a visit pencil smudged on his cheek, the background a bulletin board speckled with children's drawings. I thought Adrian said that the other half should stop being a promise and turn into a picture. I wore the locket so often the chain learned the shape of my collarbone. We built house rituals because rituals are scaffolding. Wednesday nights became pasta nights. Friday meant a movie you could talk through. Saturdays, when Leo was with us, we mapped Chicago in small adventures, the free day at the museum, the park where planes stitched the sky, a hot chocolate place that dusted cups with cinnamon like snow. None of it looked like luxury on television. All of it felt like abundance to us. 2 years of hearings and home studies later in a quiet courtroom that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. A judge granted permanent guardianship to Adrian. A winter later, we made it formal adoption. The judge asked if we wanted to keep our birth surname. Leo said, "Can we be Vale Cole?" He liked the hyphen. It looked like a bridge. I nodded. The stamp came down heavy and decisive like a door sealing from wind. Responsibility found me. At the same time, ambition did. Numbers made sense in a way people sometimes didn't. When I started college at Lakeside University, close enough to commute, Adrian offered me an entry-level summer job at Coalshield with no shortcuts. Mailroom, he said, apologetic but not changing his mind. Walk the building, learn what everyone does. I did. In support, I learned how not to take a stranger's anger personally. In compliance, I learned that checklists are a kind of compassion for your future self. In finance, I learned that spreadsheets tell stories if you ask the right questions. By the end of junior year, a pattern started tapping at my attention. Small businesses kept calling, and our enterprise packages scared them away before the second paragraph. Ransomware didn't care about company size. Phishing didn't either. I drafted a proposal for Shield Light, a subscription tier that would give mom-and-pop shops actual protection without the sticker shock. Adrian read it at the kitchen table, red pen in hand, and made fewer marks than my professors. "Want to present this to the board?" he asked. My stomach tried to exit through my knees. I said yes anyway. The boardroom smelled like cedar and confidence. I wore the only blazer I owned and spoke faster than I meant to until Adrian folded his hands, our prearranged signal to breathe. I walked them through the numbers, acquisition costs, churn projections, how a simpler dashboard reduced support time, how partnering with chambers of commerce could replace a sales team we didn't have. Questions bit and then softened. When I stepped out, Adrian didn't hug me. He had learned I didn't like surprises, but his eyes made the room warmer. Months later, after a cautious pilot became real revenue, Irving Hale, the CFO, slid a card across a table, Vice President Small Business Security. "You earned this." Adrian said, the compliment not a pat on the head, but a transfer of trust. Leo thrived too. He earned a spot at the Midwest Institute of Arts, traded pencils for charcoal, and then for oil. He painted cities that looked honest about their loneliness and trees that looked brave. He still called before big storms just to hear someone breathe on the other end. Some habits keep you safe. Our family looked unconventional from the outside. A single man, a college student in blazers, an art kid who carried his own world in a portfolio. From the inside, it looked like three people choosing each other daily. We didn't match so much as we fit. Then came the doctor's report, black and white, and devastating without adjectives. Adrian asked me to come to the appointment because the things we were now were built on the things we had been: child, guardian, colleague, family. The oncologist spoke gently and directly. Pancreatic cancer, late stage. She described options in terms that were really triage-measured months, like a currency we didn't want to spend. Adrian thanked her, shook her hand, as if she'd delivered a sensible merger, and asked for copies of everything. In the parking garage, he put his palms flat on the steering wheel and did nothing for a full minute. Then he turned to me. "We are going to manage this," he said, "the same way we've managed everything together with a plan." Plans became ladders. He reorganized leadership at Coalshield, elevating Irving and the chief of engineering to an executive committee. He let Rina Sato, his executive assistant, defend his calendar like a line of scrimmage. He wrote letters for rainy days that were coming and made a list, a literal one, of the people he wanted to look in the eye while he still felt like himself. He called Magda, the housekeeper, who'd been with us since my first months in Chicago, into his office to tell her there would be a retirement package when she chose that word, not when illness chose it for her. He made work slower on purpose so we would notice each other more. Treatments stacked like tiles. Some days, the drugs made him foggy, and I learned to pause meetings when his gaze drifted. Other days, he insisted on walking to the lake before dawn, claiming the water steadied him. Leo moved back from campus on the worst weeks and turned part of his studio into a quiet corner where Adrian could watch him paint without needing to talk. We adjusted the way families do when time stops being theoretical. He never pretended he wasn't sick. He simply refused to let the sickness be the most interesting thing about him. We still argued about whether pizza in our neighborhood was better than the one 3 blocks over. We still kept Wednesday pasta night. We still called Dr. Lin when anger crept in sideways and sat with it until it told the truth. Grief starts before the loss. 2 summers after the diagnosis, Adrian handed me a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. Inside was an old brass compass, edges worn smooth. "It belonged to your great-grandfather," he said. "I kept it on my desk for years to remind me that progress is not a straight line." The needle trembled, then found north. "Keep it," he said, "for when it's dark or too bright, for when you need a direction that isn't someone else's." He lasted longer than the most conservative estimates, and less long than our hope liked to pretend. On a morning in late June, sunlight pooling on the floor like a blessing we didn't order, he squeezed my hand, then Leo's, and his breath unspooled into quiet. There is a kind of silence that feels like blasphemy to break. We let it sit with us. Then we called the people who needed calling. The funeral filled a cathedral that had held other important sorrows. Executives came because Adrian had been good at making smart things happen. Janitors came because he had learned their names first. Leo played a piece at the piano he'd written over months, a melody that kept walking forward even when the harmony wanted to fall apart. I stood at the lectern and told the truth. Adrian had not saved us by being rich. He had saved us by staying. After the service, in the hush that follows formality, 2 figures lingered at the back, like a rumor. Someone didn't want to spread Victor and Celine Vale. 15 years had not been kind. The expensive shine they wore in lieu of character in my childhood had tarnished into something thinner. Celine's earrings caught the light like cubic zirconia, determined to audition as diamonds. Victor's watch had the wrong second hand for the brand on its face. They waited until the receiving line thinned, and then approached practiced expressions arranged carefully. Celine reached out, as if some eternal magnet would bridge the years. I stepped back. Leo shifted closer to me without looking down. "Mira," she said, voice sea glass smooth. "We came as soon as we heard." "You heard today then?" Leo said, the edge in his voice new enough to surprise me. "Because you didn't hear any of the years before this. We need to talk privately," Victor said, as if he were suggesting lunch. "There are things you don't understand." Before I could reply, a presence steadied the air. Evelyn Park Adrian's longtime attorney, A woman with the posture of a metronome and the temperament of a warm winter coat stepped beside us. "Ms. Vale Cole." "Mr. Vale Cole," she said, nodding to us first. Then to them, "This is not the moment."
"We're family,"
Celine said, pressing the word like a claim ticket. "Family shows up on ordinary Tuesdays," Evelyn replied. "This is Saturday." She shepherded them away with a grace that belonged mostly to her spine, then turned back to us. "I apologize," she said, "but I will also ask that you both attend the reading of the will on Friday." Adrian left very specific instructions about who must be present. My stomach dipped. Leo looked ready to refuse the entire concept. Evelyn softened her voice. "It will be worth your time. Grief is paperwork." The weeks slid by in tasks that didn't feel worthy of their subject, canceling subscriptions, answering emails that wanted a form more than a reply, opening casserole lids from neighbors who cooked like compassion. On Friday morning, Cole and Park LLP rose from the sidewalk like a stack of old books. Oak panels, rugs that held stories, oil portraits of serious founders who had never met us and would have liked us anyway because Evelyn did. We arrived early, dressed in black that didn't match but harmonized. Magda was already in the conference room wringing her hands and then flattening them on her skirt. Irving Hale stood by the window with a posture that tried to be casual and failed. Rena Sato carried a stack of folders labeled in a hand I recognized from years of hallway sightings. Evelyn greeted each of us by name, then poured water as if hydration were a legal strategy. At exactly 10, the elevator delivered Victor and Celine. They had polished themselves for the occasion. Celine wore a dress that wanted to be expensive and almost pulled it off if you squinted. Victor had shaved, but not well. The room cooled by a few degrees when they entered the way a cloud can cross the sun without anyone agreeing to it. "We'll begin," Evelyn said, taking her seat at the head of the table. The document in front of her was thick without being ostentatious. "This is the last will and testament of Adrian Marcus Cole, executed 6 months ago with all requisite witnesses and certifications." Victor rolled his eyes so slightly it qualified as a tick. Evelyn did not notice, or pretended not to. She started with the formalities, debts, to be settled. Charitable gifts Adrian had specified in careful detail. Funds earmarked for scholarships, a grant to our community clinic, a bequest to a neighborhood arts center that had once given Leo a room and a box of pastels. Magda covered her mouth when Evelyn read that the lake cottage Adrian loved now belonged to her along with a retirement fund substantial enough to cancel worry. Rina received a gift that acknowledged all the invisible labor the world expects assistants to perform without applause. Irving blinked too quickly when his name was read, which is how some men cry. And now, Evelyn said, turning a page with deliberate care, "We come to the matter of Victor Vale and Celine Vale." The room thinned to a single point. Victor's chair creaked as he sat taller. Celine arranged her mouth into sorrow's outline. "To Victor and Celine Vale." Evelyn read, her voice unruffled. "Adrian leaves the sum of $1 each, together with a letter addressed to you both, which shall be read aloud at this time." My fingers went cold despite the heat humming through the vents. Leo's breath hitched, then steadied. Victor laughed a short bark. "This is some kind of joke," he said. "He always loved his theatrics." Evelyn lifted her eyes, the faintest suggestion of winter there. "No joke," she said, sliding a sealed envelope from the folder. She broke the seal cleanly. "Shall I proceed?" I nodded once. The room listened. Evelyn Park slit the envelope with a silver opener and read without hurry, as if cadence itself were the spine holding the room together. "To Victor and Celine Vale. If this is being read, you have done what I predicted surfaced at a moment when attention and assets gather in the same place." Victor gave a crooked smile that did not reach his eyes. Celine arranged her mouth into sympathy. "I kept records?" Evelyn continued, "Not because I enjoy paperwork, but because patterns tell the truth. 15 years ago, 3 days after you left Mira and Leo with a stranger, you demanded $50,000 for privacy, your word. You repeated versions of this demand over the years, 13 in total. Each time I saved what you sent and what you said." She set the letter down and pressed a button on a small remote. A monitor lowered from the ceiling with a soft motor hum. The first clip was a voicemail date stamped, Victor's voice thick. "Adrian, you know what's best for the kids. Pay what you owe family, and nobody needs to dredge up the past." The next file was not a video, but a bank statement enlarged on the screen. Evelyn narrated transfers to burner accounts, cash outs at casinos, a brief spike of purchases in 3 states, then nothing. Another clip Celine filmed by a camera that understood fluorescent light too well, speaking with the calm of a person who rehearses. We could go to court, we could tell a different version, but we'd rather not make a mess for the children's sake. Victor slapped a palm on the table. Anyone can fake a clip, Mr. Vale, Evelyn said softly, and the quiet did what loudness could not. Each file is accompanied by metadata, phone company logs, notarized transcripts, and corroborating documents. If you dispute authenticity, we can test it. But not here. She returned to Adrian's letter. I avoided telling Mira and Leo because there was no benefit in giving their pain more vocabulary. Early on, I paid small amounts so they wouldn't be dragged through hearings built on lies. Later, I stopped paying and started documenting. The entire record was transferred to federal investigators at 9 this morning. Celine reached for drama like it was a familiar scarf. He's framing us. We were desperate. Desperation is not a defense for exploitation, Evelyn read, nor for the other schemes you ran, contractor scams, charity drives that kept the money, fake relative calls to older adults. My investigators traced enough to establish pattern and intent. The letter turned then toward us. Mira, Leo. I am sorry for what I hid, and I am not sorry for why. Your childhood didn't need additional villains. What you needed was space to become yourselves. You have done that with a courage that humbles me. The last paragraph addressed the estate. Everything not already designated my shares in Coal Shield real property investments and personal items. I have not separately gifted passes in equal parts to Mira Vale Coal and Leo Vale Coal. I trust you to care for people the way you care for spreadsheets and paintings, attentive to detail, generous with time. Evelyn folded the letter. Victor stood so abruptly his chair skidded. You can't cut us out, he barked. We're their parents. You were their origin, Evelyn answered. Parenting is a behavior. 2 men in dark suits stepped through the door with quiet choreography badges briefly lifted. Mr. and Ms. Vale. One said we have questions regarding interstate fraud and attempted extortion. You're not under arrest at this moment, but we'd like you to come with us. Don't you dare, Celine sputtered, then pivoted to us. Mira, sweetheart, tell them we're family. Family is a verb, I said. You stopped conjugating it. They were escorted out, Victor muttering threats that sounded small once the door closed. The room did not exhale for a beat. Then Evelyn resumed the work in front of us, as if returning to a recipe where the next step still matters. There are a few remaining items, she said, distributing folders. Magda, you'll find the cottage transfer and retirement trust details here. Rena recognition bonus, and the option grant Adrian authorized last month. Irving letters regarding the governance transition, and a schedule for the special board session next week. When the others had gone, Evelyn stayed. He also left personal letters, she said, sliding 2 envelopes across the table. He wrote them by hand. He wanted you to read them privately. We sat for a moment after she left the envelopes between us like small harmless objects that might still change the temperature of a room. Leo nodded at mine, and I nodded at his, a pact of sorts. We opened them at the same time. Adrian's handwriting had architecture upright, precise, with occasional reckless loops when emotion outran penmanship. Mira. I chose a public unmasking because shame likes to live in shadows. I didn't want you carrying even a gram of doubt about why they left. I have seen you measure risk and compassion with the same scale. Whatever you decide to do with what I've left, keep the company sell part of it fund. Libraries do it in your voice. The compass I gave you is a reminder. The needle wanders before it settles, and sometimes north is not the direction everyone else is walking. Leo, you draw what the rest of us don't know how to say. I kept your sketch of the Cloud City over my desk because it made me braver. Don't let grief turn your palette to grayscale. When it hurts, paint it. When it lifts, paint that too. There's an easel in the study that's too large for the room. Keep it there anyway. Houses should be slightly inconvenient to remind us we're alive. I pressed the paper to my chest and felt the shape of the words through cotton. Leo wiped his face with his sleeve, then laughed once quietly at his sleeve for being bad at it. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had happened. Inside, everything had. The weeks after a death have their own bureaucracy. We signed, forwarded, countersigned. I learned how to sit through a 3-hour board discussion and say one thing that mattered. Irving coached pretending not to. Rena carried calendars like a shield and made time liquid. The criminal matter moved faster than I expected. The agents who had visited that day followed up with a stack of documents labeled in a way that looked calm, even when the contents were not. Victor and Celine accepted plea agreements before trial conspiracy to commit wire fraud attempted extortion, less for contrition than because the evidence was a tight net. Victor received 7 years in federal prison, Celine 5, with a restitution order that would chase them like weather. The letters began arriving from people who had been targeted. The widow, whose roof repair never happened, the retired teacher who mailed cash to a grandson she never had. We met with some of them not to apologize for sins we did not commit, but to witness their stories so they weren't alone with them anymore. Leo sketched portraits as they spoke, leaving each person with a drawing of themselves seen kindly. "What do we do with all of this?" Leo asked one night. Hands wrapped around a mug he was not drinking from. "Not the money. The weight. Carry it differently," I said, surprising myself with the answer. "Redistribute it." I had already been thinking in that direction. The idea formed between grief and spreadsheets a foundation built to reunite siblings split by the foster system and to underwrite the unglamorous costs, bus tickets for supervised visits, legal filings, short-term housing when placements shifted. We called it the Adrian Cole Fund for Family Continuity because the long name kept us honest. Cole Shield matched the seed grant. County agencies called back faster than I've ever heard government call back. The first checks we cut were small and immediate. The second wave built partnerships. Cole House opened a year later in a sunlight-heavy building downtown, counseling rooms, painted in colors softer than waiting room beige. A play corner with puzzles that didn't have missing pieces. A kitchen, because everything human is easier near a kettle. On opening day, a boy about 12 hovered by the door clutching a card made from notebook paper. His foster parents stood behind him with the posture of people who had learned to care without being thanked enough for it. "Are you Mira?" he asked, almost whispering. "I am." He looked down at the card, then up. "You helped us get my sister's visits approved again," he said. "She's 8. She likes butterflies and ketchup." "That is a powerful combination," I said, and he smiled the way someone does when their world expands by one safe adult. He handed me the card. Inside, in block letters, "Thank you for finding my family again." I felt something untie inside my chest I hadn't noticed was cinched. Leo started a program at Cole House on Wednesday afternoons, open studio for siblings. He taught charcoal basics and perspective without calling it that, offered snacks that didn't pretend to be a meal and yet somehow felt like one, and insisted on labeling each piece with 2 names, not one shared authorship as a promise. People asked whether I intended to run Cole Shield one day. I didn't answer publicly. The board named an external CEO, Harper Quinn, a woman with a resume that made recruiters salute. I stayed as EVP overseeing the Shield Light division and a new civic partnerships unit that distributed discounted licenses to nonprofits. I liked the feeling of being an operator more than a figurehead. Liking something that is not glamorous is a freedom. A year into their sentences, a letter arrived from Celine at a women's federal facility in West Virginia. The paper was lined, the handwriting thinner than I remembered. "Mira, I don't expect a reply and I won't ask for anything. I have a long time here to think. Some days I can't look directly at what I did. I am trying to do it anyway. The only true thing I know how to say is that you became extraordinary without me, and I am not surprised." I folded it and placed it with Adrian's letter. Not because it belonged in the same category, but because all the strands of a story eventually live in one box. I did visit Celine once months later. She looked older, but age wasn't the difference. Humility was. She asked about Leo, about the foundation, never about money. We spoke for 15 minutes about small, clean things, the book she was reading, the view from the courtyard. I left with no epiphany and no new wound. Sometimes closure is just a door you choose not to reopen. I did not visit Victor. Some distances are boundaries, not punishments, and I have learned to honor my own. Life did not stay solemn. It widened. I learned to cook one meal really well, and many others adequately. I started running by the lake, not because I love running, but because I love the feeling afterward of being a person with breath. I went on dates I wasn't ready for, and then one I was with Alex, a civil engineer who did not try to fix things that weren't broken, and who asked good questions about storm drains and also about me. We moved carefully. Leo teased me once and then protected my privacy like a bodyguard. On the anniversary of Adrian's passing, Cole House held a small gathering staff. Families, caseworkers, the janitor who always left the art room last because he liked seeing what kids had made that day. Leo hung a painting near the entrance. A compass rose each cardinal point labeled not NESAW, but stay, listen, repair, share. I spoke briefly, not because I like microphones, but because gratitude is a thing you should not hoard. We were rescued by one person who kept showing up, I said. Now we get to multiply that rescue. If you are here today, you are part of that math. Afterward, I sat on the steps and watched a brother teach his little sister how to blow a soap bubble big enough to wobble like a planet before it broke. The sun caught the film just right, and for a second, the bubble held 4 colors I couldn't name. Adrian would have stood with his hands in his pockets and pretended not to cry. The compass sits on my desk. The needle quivers, then steadies as if to say you will wander, you will find your line. When the day gets loud, I hold it and remember that he trusted me with a company and a mission, but more than that, with the right to choose the life I want. Family, I have learned, is not a contract signed once. It is a daily practice who calls, who shows up on ordinary Tuesdays, who keeps the kettle filled. If you ask me now what the inheritance was, I would not start with numbers. I would start with this: a house where siblings make art on Wednesdays, a city that feels more mine because I helped map a corner of it. A brother who still calls before storms, a man's voice in a letter reminding me that north is something you find, and sometimes something you make. We keep going. That promise turned out to be the whole story. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.